And we're live! Hey everybody, you've stumbled in. You couldn't avoid us. Here we are, hashtag SPSM, the Suicide Prevention Social Media Chat, right? Maybe you knew what this was. Maybe you heard about it somewhere in my rambles across this great land this week, and you decided to drop in. You should know, if this is your first time joining us, that simultaneous to this live stream on YouTube, there is a Twitter chat, and you just type in hashtag SPSM, and you can follow along with all of the comments that people are making. We will be monitoring the Twitter chat and commenting to things that people post. I'm at Doc Foreman. I'm April Foreman. I'm a psychologist. I'm a suicidologist. I work in many capacities. I both work with Veterans Affairs, although I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I'm on the board of the American Association of Suicidology and on several other advisory boards related to suicide and suicide prevention. And I'm so excited that we're going to be talking about what's happened this weekend. So if you come to SPSM, you come for expert-to-expert content talking about what's new in innovation in suicide prevention. And I would love to introduce you to my co-producer and very good friend, Dr. Bart Andrews. Dr. Bart Andrews, say hi to the people.
Hey, all the people out there. Welcome to SPSM. So excited for another show. I am Dr. Bart Andrews. You can find me on Twitter at Bart Andrews. I am from, and I get to say it this time, April, I am from a groovy little crisis center in St. Louis, Missouri, Behavioral Health Response. A shout out to all the BHR peeps that are on the line. The show tonight is pretty exciting. We've got like bigwigs in the house. I know it's a really big deal, and I'm really excited for the show.
And this time, it's not actually wigs.
It's not actually wigs. What did I miss a wigs episode? Did I?
I'm just saying for our usual fare, our usual shtick, people need to know it's not an actual wig.
Do we have can everybody make a pledge that they're not wearing a wig for the show? Do we need a yeah, I don't.
Okay.
All right, we're wigless, and I'm really excited, and I can't wait to hear from our guests, because just the little bits I've heard have been really exciting, and this is pretty cool.
And so in addition to Dr. Bart Andrews, we have Chris Maxwell. Chris, introduce yourself to the people.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Maxwell. I'm coordinator of member engagement for the largest national suicide prevention hotline in the country. I also serve as co-chair for the Strategic Media Response Task Force for the American Association of Suicidology. I, like Bart, am ecstatic to hear what our guests have to say tonight. We've heard April talk about it for like all day yesterday and today, so we're like really super excited. So yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, they love it when I say we're going to learn about cryptocoin currency mining. Go at like some point by text message yesterday, which we will be talking about and sharing what we do understand about it. But if you're one of those people out there in the Twitterverse or out there watching a stream and you understand some of the technicalities of these topics better than us, that's totally fine. I'm just a shrink, but I would love if you are a data scientist or someone who understands one of our technical topics, please do go to hashtag SPSM and tell us more. But I want to talk about the National Day of Civic Hacking, because this is a pretty groovy event. And I want to talk about our two guests who are with us today, because these are folks that I got to meet really for the first time last year and have then got to have some ongoing relationship or collaborations with in various capacities. So I got to meet, and it's actually Honey, right? Dr. Kristin Honey, correct?
Honey.
Honey.
Honey like the food.
Why do people want to tell me it's the other thing and then I think I'm pronouncing it wrong?
It's honey like the food.
See, that's what I thought, and then I got corrected in a meeting. Now I'm feeling embarrassed. We have Dr. Kristin Honey, who actually spoke and was one of our plenary speakers in 2006 at the AAS National Conference, talking about data science and White House initiatives around using open data for the benefit of our citizens. We were at that very time launching ourdatahelps.org, donate today in service of preventing suicide. And you know, that was one of those things where we were really starting to talk about those concepts just as I was meeting her. And of course, then I went in April to the Brain Trust, and I got, after I had said a few words, Dr. David Maron just was like, April Foreman, we're going to do great things, and just sort of shows up at the foot of the stage. Not even going to kid you. And then a few months later, we are releasing the first synthetic open data set about veterans who had died by suicide. These are folks who move very quickly. They do some really interesting projects in the space and have sort of different specialties. So without further ado, Dr. Honey, introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kristin Honey, and I'm a senior research scholar with Stanford University, as well as a senior policy analyst at the White House Office of Management Budget. But probably most importantly, I am an open data evangelist and innovator, and most excited about how do we solve complex, wicked challenges, meaning we need all different perspectives, all different hands on decks. And suicide prevention is one of those wicked challenges, and we need everyone's help.
And Kristin, can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up here? It wasn't like just sort of one day you're like, data for everyone. Like, how did you end up in this space?
It was kind of a weird mix. In the dot-com days, I co-founded a tech company, so I had sort of that data background and entrepreneurial thing, and then I pivoted, went to science, and did a PhD. So I'm not the kind of doctor who helps people, but the more research side. And then it was really about how can you use data to solve these complex challenges and looking at things as interconnected networks. So I did that with environmental science, but the same thing with human health. If you're going to approach wellness, you have to look at the physical, emotional, mental, everything. And so doing that, what better way than data? And when I first arrived at the White House about 2.5 years ago, it became apparent that there was not a lot of data that was high resolution to really inform what was driving like mental health challenges or solutions and what actually worked. So without that data, how could we possibly know which knobs to turn, how to have the biggest bang for the buck and the biggest impact? So that was
I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask your thoughts on something before we introduce our next guest. Tell us what you mean by high resolution data and tell us why you think we didn't have very much.
So high resolution data would be like individual records or records that are aggregated to a degree so that you can't re-identify them and potentially violate someone's privacy, but still informative. And because there's a fear that you might be able to individually identify people, a lot of times so many medical records would be combined that maybe signals would get fuzzed out. You couldn't see them. And then I think another layer in this space with mental health and suicide prevention is that there's a stigma attached to it. And so certain data sets would just not be unlocked in the fear that because news articles might have been published, that people could be re-identified. So there's even less out there than normal.
And I'm going to definitely say, like, when we're talking about open data and suicide, that's definitely one of the things. The stigma around suicide extends to discussions about data and how to make it available and how to use it and what we should do with it. Because people are, like, I mean, being rightfully cautious in a lot of ways, but there are sort of an emotionality about that caution that also has to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of people who are data evangelists, Dr. David Maron, introduce yourself.
Oh, I'll introduce myself as working to be Dr. David Maron. So just one clarification, I'm in this working on it. I'll get there. Clinical side, right. So I work for the Veterans Affairs. I'm the Chief of Biostatistics at the DC VA Medical Center. Like you, April, I'm speaking, not in that capacity. But from that work, I have had a lot of exposure with big data. I work a lot with the electronic medical record. And by meeting you, I was able to really learn a lot about how suicide and big data have this really, frankly, exciting future, the impact that it can have. And so since we started working together, I kind of was able to bring together my mental health background and my data science skills and kind of help from my little space try to bring things forward. And the thing that's gotten me so excited and got me really it's got me really jazzed is that we have the potential, right? But what we need right now is for people to connect with each other. Like the different disciplines, we need to be talking and having relationships with folks outside of our disciplines, and seeing where the innovations can occur and the insights can occur to help move us forward. And so for me, that feels like really like it's kind of simple. Like it's like, the technology and the data parts, actually we can figure those things out. It's right now, it's getting all the people to the table and getting them a part of the process. And so I get really excited about that, because it's like, oh, who knows where we could be a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now. And there's just so much more momentum that's building on itself. And our event was, an example of that. So yeah, so that's me.
So I've gotten a shout out from Dr. Bill Undersocks Schmitz, who said it's always great when Dr. Foreman botches both guests' names and titles. Good news, we're totally on trend for us. We're on brand for us. So David Maron, so when you talk about getting everybody to the table, what do you mean by that? And who needs to be at the table, who isn't, or who has just arrived?
Well, I mean, everyone, it's the motto at the VA, and again, I'm not talking about the VA, but one of the great mottos is suicide prevention is everyone's business. Okay, so really everyone should be at the table, but for folks that identify as a person that does suicide research, as a data experience, someone has some connection with businesses that can help facilitate. We need all of these types of folks interconnecting with each other, so that people can appreciate and understand, well, okay, how do you go from idea to impact as rapidly as possible? And we need to be like accelerating and having events where we are working together, but then also mechanisms so that people are able to sustain the relationship over time is kind of the idea. Because we have our when I was saying like our event, we had our National Day of Civic Hacking.
Before we get to that, you did an event last year. You did an event last year that sort of, was an event to build on that. So explain last year's event, and then I'll have Kristin introduce what happened yesterday. How about that?
Perfect, great. Yeah, so where I met you was at the Brain Trust. For those of you who don't know, the VA had this Brain Trust event where they had the NFL come to the VA and bring a lot of other businesses and academic institutions all together. And it was actually my first experience at that type of event where you had all of these different perspectives coming together. Really exciting, and they had that whole research on CTE. Like that recent study that showed 111 out of 112 of these people, in the NFL had CTE. They did the autopsies on them. Those were the people that did that research, right? For that event, that's that crowd. And I said, well, hey, what if we did something for suicide prevention for that? And that's where we came together with Veterans Affairs Suicide Prevention Innovations. And that happened last year, September 10th, the first anniversary of World Suicide Prevention Day. And it was a 2-day event, and we had that converging of the different fields working together, and hacking on data work and problem solving in an iterative fashion. We had a whole competition, and the best ideas were presented, and we had our great friend Tony Wood was there, a lot of other wonderful AAS and great suicidologists. So that was our event, our start. For me, that was my kicking things off here. So I meet you, and weeks later, suddenly we're doing an event. And then Kristin, you and I got to know each other a little bit more through the course of something called the Opportunity Project.
That's right.
That was also related. And this National Day of Civic Hacking sort of was of that sort of same lineage. Can you explain the Opportunity Project and how we get to National Day of Civic Hacking?
Sure. The Opportunity Project is something that Department of Commerce runs, and it's a unique way to do public-private partnerships and short-term sprints with technology using federal open data for any problem. So I believe that Veterans Affairs and HUD really led a challenge on veterans homelessness, but that's in collaboration with industry, because government alone, we need all hands on deck. It's going to be us unlocking the data and then innovators and industry and problem solvers everywhere, not just in government, building products and tools on top of that. So how can we improve veterans' homelessness, mental health issues, all that. So that was how April and I connected, and that spirit of the Opportunity Project is very much one of collaboration. And there's different events. Sometimes they're called data jams, sometimes they're called hackathons. Big ones can sometimes be called data paloozas. And they're really kind of like democratizing events where everyone is welcome and everyone is equally valued at these things, whether you have the MD, the PhD, lived experience, or you're the loved one of someone with lived experience. All problem solvers and people who are just curious, welcome to the table. And you never know where the innovative ideas are going to come from. So for example, with some of these challenges and events, there was an Ebola challenge. And as most people know with Ebola, the suits were cumbersome, and in hot, you know, if it's hot working them, they're hard to get on, people wouldn't wear them and the protective suits wouldn't work. So there was a challenge to make the suits more effective. And one of the winners of that, a team, was combined of engineers and I believe it was MIT and Johns Hopkins students with a wedding dressmaker. So you never know where innovation is going to come from, but from often the most unexpected places. So yesterday's National Day of Civic Hacking was very much that, where we had 5 priority themes, themes such as open data for hurricane disaster relief, open government, Lyme disease solutions, data-driven solutions to the opioid crisis, and suicide prevention innovations. And we had people from all walks of life, public servants, people with technology skills, data scientists, graphic designers, community organizers, and anyone just interested in their community and these issues, including some middle schoolers who arguably had the most innovative ideas of the day.
We're going to talk about those middle schoolers because if you are involved with AAS and with our new website, have I got news for you. But so we had a lot of different people show up to the National Day of Civic Hacking, and this was a very specific one-day event, and it wasn't just our one event. There were events all over the place. So can you explain a little bit about what those events were like and then what happened at our event?
Sure, absolutely. So National Day of Civic Hacking is now in its 5th year, and it's organized by Code for America, Second Muse, and local industry chapters that call themselves brigades. So it looks really different in different local places. But yesterday, at National Day of Civic Hacking, dozens of cities organized their own events around community challenges. So the event we were at, Johns Hopkins Sibley Innovation Hub, focused on these wicked challenges that might be solved, or at least like we get a little closer to solving them using federal data resources. And there was also another event in DC that was organized by the mayor's office, and they focused on different challenges from transportation to helping seniors to eliminating the rat populations in Washington, DC. So at the federal level, we were dealing with different things from hurricane disaster relief, suicide prevention, opioid crisis. And these teams formed. Is very organic. You don't really know how it's going to go till the day of, but people give these quick lightning pitches of why is this problem important to them and what resources they bring to it and what skills they would like to add to their toolkit and together work towards new ideas or new ways of thinking and forming these teams. And so one of the challenges is always, how do you keep this momentum going and moving forward? But I think yesterday we have a good plan for that with a lot of different events in the near future. So for example, HHS will be hosting a data-driven hackathon for the opioid crisis in December. MIT Hacking Medicine and Harvard will be hosting a Lyme Innovation Hackathon in October. So there are future hackathons that are planned to continue this momentum. And I think this group here can help continue the suicide prevention innovations.
So before I check in with David, I would love to have 2 follow-up questions. So the first thing I'd want to know is, how do people find out when these are or what's being covered? Like, how do people stay in touch with that information?
Yeah, there's a open data listserv that we send things out to. And so if you give me a minute, I can give you the URL, or you can Google Federal Open Data Working Group. And then there's a page and it will have a link where you can self-subscribe, but it's a Google group. And we send out announcements whenever these things happen, as well as on data.gov. Easiest way is probably data.gov/events. And if you go to data.gov/events, it's anything and everything related to federal open data or just data science that specifically with the federal government.
And we have my second question, and thank you. Some folks are taking care of that, and hopefully we'll be able to tweet out the link to that like right now.
Perfect.
Because you SPSMers are great. But we have several researchers and people in various stages in their career who are interested in data. And one of the things that I didn't know until this year's hackathon that you announced was that you can search through the data sets to see what kind of data is available. And you can also make requests for data that you need that isn't there, right?
Correct.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, on data.gov, there's a contact page. So if you go to data.gov/contact, and you can't find what you're looking for, you can put in requests. And we sort of think of it like a concierge service, and you will get routed to the right people, the right agency, the right owners. And it's really helpful for us as well when you give us requests, because we want to unlock federal data that will be of most value to the outside. So those demand signals of researchers want this data, we respond to it. So data.gov/contact is the best way.
So SPSMers, if you're doing research, if you're interested in data science about issues related to suicide and you think that there's population data that you would like available for research, you need to go to data.gov and make a request for data sets that you need, even if they don't exist. And I've met some of these folks. There are open data folks in the federal government who do try to figure out how to bring this to people and make our federal data work for our citizens. Did I get that about right?
Yes, I could not have said it better. Thank you.
Now, David, Maron, you really helped with, you were amazing helping with the National Day of Civic Hacking and organizing it. Tell us a little bit about what went into this event and who some of the people were who spoke.
So yeah, a lot went into this, and it really evolved very rapidly, particularly towards the end. And actually, before I jump in, I want to say that I want to give a big shout out to Nick Dawson.
Sorry, he's been my Twitter friend forever. I'll do that for you right now. You talk, I'll tweet.
Yeah, so he was a wonderful collaborator, and he has just this incredible space. And I met him through Dr. Honey, and he and I started working together, and we worked out like a lot of the logistics, and he helped so much with the graphics on a lot of the visual pieces that we put together. I mean, there was definitely a lot of logistical hurdles. We were like getting the right funding or getting the right people to come together, and I was definitely burning the candle at both ends. But we were able to make it so that Tom Cruise was able to show.
Our Tom Cruise.
Not the actor. I just wanted to make sure everyone was paying attention. Tom Cruise, not the actor. He, I assume the SPSM active military in the Army, and he is someone who has lived experience. He and his wife, had a very serious but uplifting story, and they were able to share their experience with everyone there, and it really grounded a lot of what we, what we were working with. So we had the Cruise family. We had some wonderful speakers. Colleen Creighton from the American Association for Suicidology, the executive director. She was wonderful. And Kristin actually brought in, so like we were really focusing on the suicide prevention piece. So I think Kristin was able to connect us with a lot of these other folks that were working on those other items. So the opioid addiction, the Lyme disease, the hurricane relief, and it was like kind of amazing. They kind of all came in the last like week or so. We pulled it all together. I kind of was just sticking it out, and we made it. We were able to pull through it.
It was the sprint towards the finish line was an amazing moment. So that when we were going into that, I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, and then it was sort of like magic. And actually, several great things in terms of suicide prevention and some things that suicide prevention was able to contribute to other folks happened at the hackathon. could I get, I'm going to direct our next question, but first I want to check in with Bart and Chris. A bunch happened on the Twitter thread, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to review and check in with Bart and Chris for commentary. Bart.
Well, I've learned a lot tonight about the role of hormones in suicide, which was an unexpected boon on the thread today. So thanks for that. But I think the thing that's really interesting to me, and I don't know, we've tried to get this message out to the folks at SPSM, but data and big data is one of the things that we really need to solve some of these public health crises that we're facing. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're moving towards a public health model, both in the suicide crisis and in the opioid crisis. That's new for America, right? And in Europe, they've got much easier access to this public data. It's a very different system. So in the US, trying to get at this data is key. And so what I've heard David and Kristin talking about is we really need this data. And it sounds like we're coming up with some really innovative tools to try to reach out and connect some of these dots. I mean, one of the things that would be curious is what kind of data has come out? What things have you gotten access to where it's been like, yeah, that made a difference or it helped? So I'd be really curious so folks could hear some examples of where data was uncovered or shared that, hey, we could do something with this.
I can jump in here. Yeah, and so one thing that we've noticed with unlocking data is it's not just the federal government unlocking data, but when we set up data.gov, local, state, tribal, and international, other nations unlock their data. So that was really interesting, but also nonprofits. So there is a push towards open data, open science, and groups like Crisis Text Line have really progressive and open models where if you have a request for it, they will share that with researchers and make their data, and the longer they collect it, the more it'll be big data. So you're seeing that model more. So I think one of the things that surprised some of us was that by leading by example and having federal open data, we're in the middle of a scientific and medical culture shift. And it's the right thing to do, and it will make science and the medical discoveries and insights happen faster. And so it's not just the federal government unlocking it, but it's all of us. It also, the other point that's really important with this is it's about empowering patients, and patients own their data. Now, sometimes it's not always easy to get it and to transfer it, but this, transfer it or to put it where you want it or share it the way you want to. But this really empowers patients to be in control of their own information and then choose to share it with other groups who may be able to do the big data, aggregation and analysis.
So at Youth Mental Health Action Group tweeted, and they said, how recent is your suicide data in the US? And that was actually one of the things that I talked about at the hackathon, which was that we have difficulty making sure that there is recent data in the hands of public health decision makers and epidemiologists. So a lot of the data that they're working with for current interventions is 2 years old. And so that's definitely a data challenge that we think needs work. So thank you for tweeting about that. Chris, any reactions to what you're seeing in the thread?
Yeah, no, one of the things that I love hearing everybody tonight talk about, both David and Chris, we're just talking about some amazing future-oriented kind of challenges. And so, like Lisa Sullivan has pointed out, this thing that Kristin keeps talking about in these wicked challenges. And when we're talking about future-oriented challenges, finding things that a lot of different people can come together and figure out pieces and the puzzle pieces to make things work, you need to have this multidisciplinary thing that David's talking about. You need to have future-oriented ideas that Lisa Sullivan, who's a futurist, who is also an SPSM alum, has talked about in the past. You need to have all these kind of pieces fitting together, and just to be able to see this kind of event and these kind of structures happen in real time, I can imagine is probably really exciting. But yeah, so there's just this piece that we have to know where we want to go, and we have to know what we are going to need before we actually have the ability to gain it. And so it's just a really interesting conundrum to try to find all these pieces and put them in the places that they need to be.
That is a wonderful segue, and I'm wondering then if I can get David and Kristin, and you guys just jump in and I'll take care of the camera to talk about some of the ideas that happened. We had a lot of unexpected ideas and we had some great advancements. Could you guys give us some of those highlights?
Well, one of the ones that I thought was a great highlight that came out early was the peer review publication on data standards. And I think, April, you can probably summarize this best. So I'm going to kick it back to you.
I'm so excited. So if you've been on SPSM a minute, so you remember back in spring rollout of season 4, we talked about the SPSM manifesto. And we said we really need ethics, standards, and practices, and they need to be published and formalized because there are a whole lot of people that rely on established precedent to make decisions about what can be done. They feel like it's too risky, and we really need that to happen. And so that was one of the things that people were asking me about, problems that I really felt needed to be solved. And I mentioned that. And Nick Dawson, shout out Nick, we see you on Twitter. Do you know Matthew Webster's Twitter, Nick? Can you tweet me that? Matthew Webster is a data scientist engineer in residence at the Johns Hopkins Sibley Innovation Center. And he sat down with me and he says, well, we do have those standards. And he goes, but we're engineers. We don't necessarily think we have to sort of write that down. We just say, look, this is the method and we did it. And I said, if you would just write it down and publish it, I could take it to people and say, this is the standard. And then if someone disagreed with good academic, discourse, something else could be published, and we could sort of go towards a sort of understood best practice or standard that's sort of codified and people could apply, so that large medical centers and people with large amounts of data, clinical data, that needs to be secure and anonymous, can be treated so that it can be, PHI or personal healthcare information, private healthcare information, things that would identify you could be treated and would be anonymous, but the clinical information we could give to researchers more easily. We have a lot of researchers lined up ready to do research. We have a lot of people who want us to have their data, and then we've got the importance of being ethical with it in the middle, and decision makers who need to know what the standard is. And Matthew Webster, if anyone can help me find him on Twitter so we can thank him, and he emailed me today, he's going to help us do that. And I was so thrilled. He was like, that's so easy.
Yeah. And I just want to jump on that, because that's just like a perfect example of what these events are like, where people are working on a lot of different things in their, they're all in different branches, maybe you're in engineering or in whatever, any number of things. And you actually can be working on stuff where your solution is, with just a minor amount of tweaking, able to be applied to something else. And so it's kind of this like, oh, we just have like a lot of connecting the dots to do, but we can do it like really quickly. And then, in a matter of, an afternoon, I felt like towards the end of the day, like everyone had some, new reveal, new insight, new information. It was like really meaningful to what they do, because we're kind of all working in parallel. And we need to kind of break down the silos. And the way we do that is just by having relationships and talking and saying like, hey, I'm working on this thing and this is what I'm working on. I'm trying to figure out. I was like, oh, it's funny. I have data that's kind of related to that, or I have some expertise in this way. And like 5 minutes later, you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna work together. We have a relationship now. And that,
there's a very nerdy term for that I love. It's actually probably my favorite word in the whole world. It comes from genetics, called exaptation, E-X-A-P-T-A-T-I-O-N. And it comes from genetics because genes evolve for like a certain purpose. It obviously has more fitness for this thing, for like some population advantage. Otherwise, it would not stay in a population. But then down the road, there's another benefit to it that just completely dwarfs the original reason why this trait evolved. So the entrepreneur world has kind of exapted that idea from genetics, and now it's kind of an entrepreneurial thing where if you have an idea in this field, but then you take it and apply it somewhere else, that's where brilliance happens. And if you look at most really big changes and insights, they're not necessarily new ideas. They're ideas that are applied in new ways to completely unrelated disciplines. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, exaptation. So thank you for bringing up my nerdy and favorite word.
We're going to use that all year now.
Adaptation.
And actually, one of our teams did that. There was a group that worked with the Lyme innovation team on the Lyme tree, and they applied blockchain technology as a way to monetize and commoditize this I guess is a nonprofit that is spun up for mental health support for people with Lyme disease or chronic illness. And the longer people are there through this blockchain technology, somehow would support the nonprofit. And towards the end of it, after we did our half-day check-ins, they impressed the suicide prevention innovations team. And I believe now, April, you might be collaborating with them, and that model might actually help some of the work you're doing.
So this was pretty interesting. So first of all, I had to learn what cryptocurrency mining was, and only sort of vaguely. And I'm wondering if Chris and Bart can help us with the link that we were passing around in our texting. And you should know, these are 8th graders, right?
Yeah.
So these are people the age of my kids, and they're like such mature, like well-thought young people. And they were helping the Lyme tree. And I said, can you do that for suicide? If we make our site and make it interactive, and we let people know that if we have more visitors to our site and we interact more, we raise more money for suicide prevention. And they were like, oh, we can totally do that. But then they're like, now wait. These are our ideas. We want to maintain our intellectual property. And we want that, they were very smart. They said, we want to make sure we maintain rights to our intellectual property. We only want to help nonprofits and folks doing social good. We don't want to give this solution to for-profit folks. We're interested in, these 8th graders understood, we're interested in designing things for social good. And then they were very clear. They said, we want to have a relationship with people for the long haul. We're not interested in short-term relationships. We're interested in long-term relationships with organizations that do good. We were lucky because we had these young designers, and we also had Colleen Creighton, who's our executive director, who's able to help us start the conversations about making that agreement. And they were just both in the room, and their parents. So we could sort of say, here's what we can do, or here's how we can have a relationship, and we're gonna start working on that. And that was something we could do because everyone was just, right there.
I got a piece. I gotta like let everybody know that they were my favorite part of the whole event. Like those kids coming and that whole thing. I was like, okay, all of the effort, everything to put it together, it was so worth it, and it was so fun to like when they gave the presentation. They blew the roof off the house. I mean, there's like 60, 70 people at this thing, and they were, just amazing. And there were two, like, it was such a great experience because there was like 2 things that just stuck out. Was they were talking to Nick Dawson, and they say to Nick, and this just to give you an example of what the day was like. They just walk up to him and they say, "Excuse me, can we have access to a Linux server?" And
so polite.
So polite, but like the gumption. And Nick's like, well, actually, yes, you can. Because Nick was so amazing that he just had an extra one lying around. And then I checked in on him, and then they asked me, were there any more burritos?
We all do, David. We all do. we all have. Who among us doesn't have an extra Linux server just laying around in case some 8th graders need to do some hacking, right?
But I mean, that was the thing, like 3 days ago, I couldn't have said to you that those things. And so like going into it and trying to put these things together, and I do suggest people do try to host these events, and it takes a lot of work, but it's so worth it. You just kind of have faith in it. The exciting things you kind of like are planting all these seeds. You have no idea what's going to grow, but these great blossoms, these great experiences happen from it. And it was like, just so rewarding just to have that one thread was great.
I also liked, I got to meet Carrie Lang, who's interested in serving the mental health needs of folks with Lyme disease. And she was talking about, much like we're talking about social media data letting us know about the progression of suicidality to an attempt or death. And she was saying we might be able to tell from people's social media data about their symptoms before diagnosis and what happens after diagnosis, and learn a lot about treatment experiences. And she goes, but we just need to get the data. And then I was like, well, we've been thinking about how do we get the data from folks with lived experience into the hands of researchers? How do we make it easy for that data to be donated? And then how do we make it agile to get it to researchers? And so we talked about collaborations in suicide prevention. And what was exaptation, Kristin? Yeah. So we exacted the heck out of it. and talked about how can we help folks with Lyme disease. Some of my experiences with our suicide watch, and there's another subreddit that I watch, our opiates, where I learn a lot about the lives and perspectives of people with opiate addiction. And for people who are interested in addressing the opiate crisis, saying, here's where you might go to learn a lot about folks with lived experience, because this is where they might be having free dialogue. And so then some of us are working on very different challenges, but we may be innovating tools that each other can use. Speaking of which, Kristin, David, we had a tweeter ask, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's okay, but there's been several tweets. If they're not a United States citizen, they still probably belong to a government, we hope. Where are the open data people? How can they find open data people in Canada, or how can people find where their government open data folks are?
I know the World Bank has a very good open data portal. At the individual country levels, I don't know about Canada or the other countries mentioned, but the World Bank has a great API and good resources, including an open data toolkit. So that might be one place to start.
And someone is suggesting datasite.org. Do you know anything about, it's DATA site, like citation, CITE. Is that sounding familiar?
I've not heard that. I've heard Data World, and I know they're a partner on some of our opportunity projects that we mentioned earlier, and that's data.world, but I have not heard of DataSite.
Yeah,
I'll have to learn.
Yeah, and data.world, think of it as like a social media for data scientists. So you can get a lot of
social media for data scientists?
Yes. Boy.
Like you have like SPSM, but for data scientists?
Yes.
How have I not met these people?
Well, just never gave up. But yeah, no, they're really great. They're great.
In post-production, we're going to chat. So I cannot believe we are sort of turning the corner in this chat, and I would love for you guys to talk about what you think is what kinds of things you think are next. So this wasn't the end of things. This is something you started several years ago, but it has sort of an arc or trajectory. Where are we going with this?
So I can jump in here, and I think it'll look different for each of the teams. So for example, the open data with the hurricane disaster relief, they are in crisis mode right now and just need to continue crowdsourcing, open mapping, doing all that, and a huge army, many people participating remotely are continuing to do that. But when hurricane season is over, I imagine the Federal Community of Practice of Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science, which is led by the amazing Sophia Liu. And Sophia B. Liu was at our event.
She was so awesome.
Yeah, she's amazing. So she'll be leading them into, next events, future ones. And I know at the event Planet Labs in Washington, D.C. said they'd already host one. So that momentum will continue. One of the biggest things we heard from that group is that open mapping and just entering data on whether or not places are flooded or buildings still exist is boring. So having the crowd, having other people around really helped keep the momentum up while they did this for hours. And then the gamification that they came up with, of course, and a little bit of competitive.
Because that was really smart.
It was very smart. So instead of just entering data the whole time, could you turn it into a game where, one, there was some competitive sides. You're competing with the other teammates. You're putting data in whether or not the buildings are still there, and you're literally clicking like, yes, this building exists, or it's flooded, so yeah, turning it into a game where I don't know the specifics of how their game worked, but it's a common theme to make it fun and to kind of distract you while you're actually entering in really, really valuable data.
And there were, several different ways that people could enter in geolocated information about disasters, which I thought was interesting. And I've talked about some of my experiences with social media and disaster just as a citizen, so that you could have people on the ground saying, there's a triage center here, this road is flooded here, emergency services are there, if you have chainsaws and chainsaw oils, it goes there, we need boats there. But so that citizens can, in a coordinated way, that there are tools for citizens to use in the immediate aftermath of disaster. And when I was exapting in my brain while that was going on, that there's a lot of things that folks with lived experience of suicidality crowdsource and geolocate, including where all sorts of different mental health resources are and how to use them. And those mental health resources are often not static. What is in existence and what's going to work or for whom it's available, it's sort of a moving target. And I've often wondered if there was a way that we could crowdsource so that folks with lived experience could provide, because that's actually a huge challenge in suicide prevention and in crisis work. Bart might speak to this, about there not being a sense of where all the crisis resources are when you're helping someone who is called or is texting or chatting in crisis. Right, Bart?
Yeah, I mean, resource location is an ongoing challenge. I mean, some of the 211 systems have built some pretty integrated systems, but what you see is that we have static lists, right? So you've got this static resource base, and people are literally, I kid you not, people are literally every year making phone calls to make sure that this resource is still good, and do you have any new programs, right? And the model really should be that all these things are connected digitally, and they're updated automatically, and if there's changes, those things occur automatically. And in theory, you should be able to see about availability live, right? And in fact, there's actually, we were aware of a program in Chicago that did something very similar to this, and some hospital systems recognize this challenge. And they created a live feed for their resource system, right? So everybody had access to it. If you were on the system, you had responsibility for keeping your data elements up to date. You had to update your pieces, and it worked really, really well. But nobody's done that large scale. So you've got these old, look, you guys all know about this. There's the suicide crisis line list, right? There's this website where there's this list of suicide crisis line that's been out there for years. It's the only place where where a list of supposedly all the national suicide and crisis lines are. It doesn't get updated, and people are going to it, and it's got bad data on it, right? We've got systems in place now with just a little bit of resources, we could actually have a really good, robust, a self-updating system that everybody could have access to, right? So the data's out there, we're just not really connecting the dots very well.
David Maron, I saw your face. What was your reaction to that?
Fix it, David.
Yeah, so I was like, we're on this. We're going for it. Yeah, no, I mean that's like, it's very exciting because we can. I want to get us to have too many things at once. Okay, we want to have the events, we want to have the connection, the relationship, and then a pathway for funding for these types of things. And I feel like it's really exciting that it is actually a matter of funding and just connecting the dots in a certain place. Like these things here, the technology is here, right? We can actually transform the way people are responding to these crises in actual physical events, but then mental health crises. That can happen, and it's like kind of like the future is now, right? So it is just a matter of making the process, the mechanism.
I really like what you say there, David, on the process, the relationships, the events, and then a pathway to funding.
Yes.
And it's interesting how the different groups sort of had that. So for the Lyme Innovation Group, relationships have been building. And the event we had yesterday, National Day of Civic Hacking, now MIT Hacking Medicine, Harvard, and this Carrie Ann Lang's group is hosting a 2-day hackathon in October. So if you're in the Harvard area, October 21st, 22nd, there will be continuation of this Lyme innovation work. And they do have prizes and challenges. So they are dangling out that carrot. Same thing with the opioid crisis. There's another event planned, and that is the Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. They will have, I believe, a 2-day hackathon, but it'll be between December 5th, 6th, 7th, with a big thing they announced yesterday, all focused on data-driven solutions for the opioid crisis. And HHS CTO will be leading that. And so if you're interested in the DC area in early December, that is a great touch point. And then they have a big event in April, so April 2018, where there's a health data palooza. and they will showcase a lot of these big successes. And so the teams, if they continue to build, they could be at a huge medical conference or a huge health data palooza conference and have their solutions shown in front of, hundreds, if not thousands. And with the suicide prevention, I know we've been collaborating and thinking about what are the options, and this group here, I think, is going to help shape that future of how do we build those relationships, what are the future events and milestones as carrots, and then hopefully some on-ways to pathways to funding. So once we know what the solutions are, then we can scale what works.
So once again, just Kristin, let people know how do they sign up? If you're just tuning in, how do you sign up so that you can get announcements for all of these events? If you want to participate, or if you are not there physically but you want to follow by hashtag, how can people either physically join or follow along?
Let me take a minute and get the URL in my phone, and I'll tweet it out.
We'll do that. We'll absolutely do that. I'm going to take a minute while Kristin does that to take a little break. There has been a really significant conversation in the thread about the relationship between women's menstruation hormones and suicide risk, and we're starting to have some evidence that hormone withdrawal seems to correspond to a rise in suicide risk for women, and it may even be related to perimenopause and suicide risk, and that there's somebody's tracking that. Did anybody else exact or have any ideas about ways that folks with lived experience, because then a bunch of people chimed on about either having personal experience or knowledge about personal experience related to that topic. And then I was like, well, how could we help researchers get data about that? Did anyone else have any thoughts about that part of the thread?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that's really interesting, and there's no doubt about this, but Google can certainly trend and track who's researching menopausal experiences, right? Where are their purchasing trends in terms of medical products to treat menopause, right? So there's all this data lying out there, and then we could overlay that data with, does that connect with suicide rates? Do we see where we see upticks in this sort of searching behavior or this sort of exploratory behavior? We can overlay that on with suicide rate, suicide attempt behavior, right? So there's all this stuff that if we had an organized way to look at this, could give us some really good, interesting patterns. It also gives us a place to intervene as well, right? So I think that I know for a fact that, well, I think this is what's really interesting. We don't count currently, for companies like Google and Amazon, we don't count their data resources as financial resources, right? Which is really interesting because there actually is monetary and both scientific value to all this data that's out there. And if we could just get access to this sort of thing, that would be absolutely amazing. What's really interesting, and we've talked about this, Tony, people will freely give up their data to get a free app. But you put a website out there like Our Data Helps, right? And it's hard to get lots of people to give their data. But boy, if they want to download this app or they want to use Facebook, you're basically saying, hey, take my data, and not only can you have my data, you can make a lot of money off it. I don't care as long as I can.
You can have my data if you'll just give me nail polish coupons.
Nail polish coupons, you can have all my data. Nail polish coupons for menopausal women, and we get their data. How about that? That's expectation right there, sister.
Kristin, go ahead, David.
Yeah, you made a really great point on the National Day of Civic Hacking, April, about how with suicide, it's kind of from a data thing. We don't have a lot of data like in the moment, and it's kind of a dark box, right? We can't figure it out, and I think what SPSM, the greatness of this and things like it, is that we're talking about these in this like fun, casual way, and this was one of the points that I made for the National Day of Civic Hacking, is that like, hey, this is serious, heavy stuff that we're talking about. And what you want to do is actually introduce a space of kind of non-judgment, right? And actually some compassion. So when you're talking about somebody or talking with someone, you can have that sharing of information in some way. It can just be talking, right? You share with someone, but then that actually translate over into data, right? Into data that we can start sharing if we create a culture around how we approach issues like this. There's this saying, well, exists where there's light, right? So let's all shine a light, a loving light, on these things that matter and talk about them, so that that we, we can actually come up with the solutions and share information in ways that we're stronger, we're better. That is the thing that gets me really excited, and I feel is what gives this all so much momentum and optimism for the future for me.
If you want to know about David Maron's brand, it is optimism. Just so that you know, for the folks who are just getting to meet him online for the first time, unfailing optimism. Kristin, are you ready to share?
And what am I sharing?
You had just tweeted some stuff out, and I was giving you a chance to just and we giving you the pause, and I was circling right back. Sorry, I'll segue a little better next time.
So if you're interested in staying connected with our US open data, then we have a Google group, and you can, sorry, my phone is now being slow. You can do it at https://groups.google.com/forum. This is going to be awful. I can't read this long URL. I think you just, maybe you tweet it out through yours, and then people can subscribe. The easiest way is just to Google Federal Open Data Working Group. And then the first thing it says in there is that the public can join and subscribe to this Google group. That's the quickest way.
And Kristin, we're almost to final thoughts, but how can people stay in contact with you on Twitter? So if 2 weeks from now, they just go, there was this person and she talked about this thing, and they need to reach out to you and reconnect with this idea, how do they find you again?
At KHoney, so K as in kangaroo, and honey like the food.
I like April like the month and Foreman like George. I've done this so many times. So this brings us to the final thoughts portion. This is the hour. It's unbelievable how fast it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and I will start out with final thoughts, because Bart gets mad if I make him go first too many times. So my final thoughts for tonight before we get to the guests. The reason that I'm involved with all of these things is that it has really helped me to ask brilliant people what challenges they haven't been able to solve, and ask them what they need to do good. So what is it that you really need? What is the challenge right now? What is the barrier right in front of us that we haven't figured out? And ask people to tell you what it is. And if you ask enough people, sometimes you'll find that people have problems and solutions, and you match them up like you're matching up mismatched socks in your basket of laundry. It's just sometimes you come across two that match. If you can go through life being very curious with people who have professions that are different than yours and asking what is needed, you get to do neat things like this. So for me, as a non-data expert, working with data scientists because I'm interested in this social issue, be curious, ask questions, help people connect. And that is a social skill that we have that makes a difference. That's my final thought. Dr. Honey.
My final thought goes back to the question of where do we go from here? And really, in the open data community, it's up to all of us, and it's up to you. We have open data in all sectors, so we try to be responsive to where are we going to have the most impact. So collaborate with us, let us know how we can help, and make a lot of noise, and we will respond to that demand signal and look forward to public-private collaborations at more events like this. And thank you, April, for pulling us together.
Oh, my pleasure. And almost Dr. David Maron. Final
thoughts. I'll echo everything Kristin shared. But then this is kind of a personal thing that I'll share that I get to say, but putting this event together, go do this type of stuff. Okay, go make the effort. And like, I don't have any great thing really. All I did was I just had faith and was able to just, in moments, there's times where it's like, this is hell. And then it's like, that saying, it's like, if you find yourself in hell, keep going, right? Just keep going through it. And you move through difficult experiences so that you get out to the other side, and then something fantastic happens. And so like internally, things can be falling apart, have faith. And then there's, wonderful events like this come together, and you have it's beautiful on the other side. So and that applies to most everything, but that's my final thought.
Fantastic. Chris Maxwell.
Just gonna wipe away. David. Yeah, no. I'm really excited to see what's coming up in the future. When things like standard, when it comes to things like ethics, and where the data is going to be collected from. I think that's a huge portion as well. David pointed this out. We already have the tech. Our phones already collect a majority of these things. They have our thumbprints. They have our retinal scans. They have a lot of biometric tech in them. They constantly look and see what we search for and what we're saying to our friends and to our not friends and to our therapists. So the idea that we can have this much data out there and that it exists in all these different places, and that at some ideal and in some utopia we have the ability to dive in, just dive in. I think that it's a beautiful future, and I love it.
Dr. Bart Andrews, I'll unmute myself.
So I just want to thank our guests, Kristin and David, sharing your wisdom and time at this late hour. We really appreciate it. I think one of the things that there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think you are describing processes that exemplify what we're really shooting for as we move forward in suicide prevention, getting lots of different expertise together, getting information to be shared and open, and people benefiting from each other and really coming together instead of folks trying to solve this by themselves over here and folks trying to solve something by themselves over there, getting all these things together. And one of the things that's really interesting is that this idea of a meme is information that replicates itself, right? And what you guys are really doing is you're creating a meme about information and helping replication, and it's building and it's kind of exploding. And this is the exact sort of thing that's going to help us solve the suicide problem. And lots of other things. So thank you.
And that is the hour. Just going to ask some of our presenters, go ahead and mute themselves. We can manage that. There we go. So that is the hour. We've done it again. You've been with us. One more hour on a late Sunday night. Hashtag SPSM. If you didn't get through all of the hour, don't worry. This will be available on YouTube. We'll be tweeting out the link. There'll be a curation of all of the tweets from tonight, so you can read through what the chat was saying while we were talking. And Chris Maxwell will be producing a 3 to 5 minute sizzle reel with some of the highlights and commentary from tonight. And all of that will be rolling on the SPSM Chat Twitter feed tomorrow. And you can find it on the SPSM Facebook page. If you want to come to future SPSM chats, like our Facebook page, and you'll get notified about this chat and get updates about our content, but you will also get information about related topics and related events. It's where everybody goes to sort of create a social media channel around all of this content, and we want to make sure that you get it. Have a great weekend, and thank you for joining us. And so that you know, David and Kristin, the way that we know we did a good chat is when everybody says, when are we going to do a part 2 of this topic? And we had several of those tweets tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. And everyone have a fantastic week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.